This is the fourth in a sequence of drawings where I'm talking through three-dimensional drawing, thinking specifically for GCSE, Key Stage 3 GCSE A-level students who are maybe looking at presenting ideas and maybe struggle with drawing a little bit. I'm teaching you the methods at the moment of perspective, and I've got on the table in front of you what you basically need for this, which is going to be a drawing pencil and a ruler. Ideally, you're going to want to have a couple of colouring pencils ready for action when you come to doing your tone work, and we'll get started. Now, I'm not going to be doing the world's most precise perspective drawing. I'm not doing any more measurement than I have to, so if you're looking for something more precise than this, then it's not the right spot for you. We're going to be doing 2-point perspective. I just wanted to show you what we've worked through so far, if you're joining us with this point. This was our first drawing, which is 1-point perspective drawing, relatively simple, where you take a front elevation and you then project back to a single vanishing point. It can give you some really good communication of ideas, particularly if you're only kind of able to draw your front elevation or your side elevation. It's an easy way of taking something back. So do watch the 1-point perspective if you're a bit stuck on that. We then moved on to the same object, but in 2-point perspective. This time we've got 2 vanishing points. I always refer to them as VP1 and VP2. Again, we've got our side elevation, but we're much more working from a front corner or a back corner and projecting backwards or forwards. 2-point perspective for a very blocky chair, but it does give you a sense of scale. Also, we're looking at, with 2-point perspective, you can see here we've got our eye level line and our horizon line. We're looking down onto the seats, but because of our eye level point, we're actually looking slightly up at the back, and I think that's a really interesting view of a product. Gives you real sort of dynamic viewpoints. Then what we did is we looked on our next drawing, we looked at dividing space a little bit, and we're going to repeat that technique today. And we created a kind of a storage cabinet with some sliding drawers at the front. It would be an interesting project, I thought, afterwards, to maybe look at how we actually get one of those drawers pulling forward using our projection through that. We might do that in a next sequence. And this was very much about dividing space, which we'll possibly look at a bit today. I'm going to do another storage unit. There's nothing much different today. This is just another follow along where you get to practice the technique, and I'll talk you through it a little bit as we go. Should take us about 25 minutes. Today's drawing is going to be, I'll give you a little sketch. I use these for measuring. Again, I've deliberately created quite extreme perspective on this to enhance the drawing. We're going to create a storage box with a lid that's hinged up slightly, and we're going to add a little bit of thickness to it and maybe divide it up. So if you were doing a storage unit or an organization system or something that you were maybe going to carry stuff in, this would be a good version as a starting point for your layout drawings for later on. So what I'll be doing on a plain piece of paper, I'll be measuring down to get our 2 vanishing points. It looks to me like we're going to work at, I think I'm going to come down 70 mil on either side, and then I'm going to come across to 140 mil at the bottom. So that's what we're going to do. This is our drawing. Let's get started. Hopefully we're looking at about 25 minutes, 30 minutes of me on the video. If you want to pause it at different stages to suit yourselves, do so. Always draw really lightly, because rubbing out is never really as effective as drawing lightly in the first place. Okay, so do take a little bit of care with it. My construction lines will be a little bit darker than I would like you to do, and some of my marks will be a little bit darker to make sure that they show up on the video. So you need to draw really as lightly as you can comfortably see it, and you do that by pressing down as little as possible. What did I say I was going to do that? That was going to be 130, I think. So there are 3 points today to start us off. So I came down 70, I came down 70, and I came across 130. I think setting ourselves out together on that particular set of measurements is going to mean that the rest of the drawing pans out quite well. So get those right, 70 and 70 and 130. Now what we're going to do the front corner of our object, we're going to just draw a line straight up the page. And again, I've said to you before, if you've got a set square, then that's great. You can use a set square to go 90 degrees up the page. That would be better, but I'm trying to keep it to minimum equipment. You could measure at the top If you want to, I'm going to just be a little bit quick and check. Remember, we were always looking at parallel. Our verticals are vertical. So I'm going to do a line straight up that page, well, up to about the halfway point. I'm just going to do that a little bit darker than I want you to make sure that you can see it. Okay, just let my camera adjust for a moment. So that's going to be our front corner. What we'll then do is we'll measure, well, I'm going to estimate here, about 1 centimetre up. That's more like about 15 mil up, isn't it? 12. Right, so about 1 centimetre up, and then from there I'm going to come up to about there, which we'll call 65, 6.5 centimetres. There's a challenge for you. 1 centimetre from there, and then a further 65 to create our 2 points, which are going to form the basis of our box. The inwards, the downward storage, horizontal storage area. Okay, so I'm going to take each of those, so that just if you were stuck on numbers there for a minute, the spacing there was 65. Remember, I don't want you to draw those numbers on. Right, now, if you've watched these before, you'll know that our next step is to go from each of those 2 points off to our 2 vanishing points, and we do those as construction lines, so we do them as lightly as possible. And do try and be precise here. When things go wrong, it's often, and when I'm seeing examples of student work, it's where they don't come to a nice sharp point together. Really get that right. And again, I'm drawing a bit darker than I want you to. Okay, and then we'll come off the other side. I'll try not to wiggle my paper around as much as that. That's annoying, isn't it? Right, now as I say, I've deliberately chosen measurements today because I wanted to slightly distort our perspective to give it as much visual impact as possible. So don't worry about how things are getting really, really skinny at this end and they're really big at that end. In perspective, things get smaller as they get further away, so you need to expect that. Right, now, again, just to keep us on track with the same drawing, so it turns out basically the same. We'll do a couple more measurements, but let's choose, we'll say 12 centimetres, 120 millimetres from that front corner there. So that's 12, 120, and we'll come this way. Let's do that at, we'll do that at 80, I think. 8 centimetres. Right, now again, if you've got a set square at home, ideal if you can do your 90 degrees off the bottom edge of your page, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my ruler there, I'm going to take my eye off it for a minute and see if I'm parallel so that my verticals remain vertical. Alright, now I only need to draw between the 2 lines. So although I'm going to line my ruler all the way up, and check that I'm parallel there, I'm only going to draw this line there. Now I'm going a little bit darker to make sure that you can see it. Check that you're not doing that. It's very, very easy to do. Check that you're vertical. Give yourself a moment to think about it. And remember the trick that I've told you, if you want to, line your pencil up with the line that you're going parallel with. Line your ruler up next to it. And then you pick your pencil up and draw your line. Okay. So there's our basic outline shape. Now what I'll do is I'm just going to go over the bottom line, so between the line that I've just drawn in the front corner and there, I'm going to darken that in. And then remember, I refer to these, I've got construction lines which are nice and light. Once I know where the lines are staying, I refer to those as keepers. So if you hear me wittering on about keepers, that's what I mean. So I'm darkening over my keepers. All right. Now, again, quite straightforward, nothing particularly complicated about the next bit. We're going to go from each of our 2 corners to a vanishing point. Now I can't go from there to there because I've already got a line, which means that I'm going from there to there. A nice light construction line, because we are not going to need all of this line. Check that you go into the right point. Check that I'm going precisely. So we go there. And then we're going to do the same on this side. Okay. So we've got our box in here. Now, at the moment, this isn't hollow. If I was doing this in a 3D modeling, I'd refer to shelling it. If we think about it in terms of construction of a real object, I'd be thinking about that as being a plank of wood, another piece of wood there, and then I'd either miter joint them or comb joint them or something like that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to draw the top of the box, and we'll then come in and we'll add that thickness in afterwards. So the next step, we're going to come on our page, we're going to come up to, we'll take it up to about here. Now again, I'm trying to decide. I'm going to estimate it, because I think what I don't want to do is spend ages doing lots of measurements. We're going to come, realistically it needs to be the same length as this shape here, but I think what we'll do is we'll take this as one of our next measurements, and I'm going to make that 70, because to my eye that's going to be about right. I'm sure people will be going, hang on, why aren't you measuring that properly? I don't want to spend, I mean that's 65 there, maybe I'm going a little bit tall. Let's do 65. Keep it the same. In reality, as we know, in perspective, that should probably be a little bit shorter because it's further away, but I'm going to just, do you know what, I can't make myself do that. We're going to come down to 60. Right, so that measurement now is 60. So ignore the top bit of that line. We're then going to come back from that 60 to VP1. And we're then going to come back from that 60 to VP2. Right, so what we've got on the top of our box is a front corner. We're now going to we're going to plot back. Let's make this one about that big. I'm not going to measure it. There's our vertical line, so I'm running parallel, and I'm going to just draw between those two lines. And I'm then going to darken in this bottom bit. So if you look, this is the back edge of the box. I need to do the bottom and the top of it as sort of fixed blocky lines, keepers, because that defines the falling away edges of our product. Okay, so we've now got the front, we've got the side elevation with the open lid, and what I'll now do is define the back edge of it by using the corner here. We're going right up to the corner there. I'm going to define the back edge by running parallel with my verticals, so that should be parallel, vertical stays vertical, and here I'm going from that corner up to the next line. Okay, I'm just waiting to see my camera has settled down. So that's the line that I've just drawn there. It goes from this corner, and I'm going to now darken in the top and the angle of that box. Okay, now at the moment it's got no depth to it, and it's got no thickness to it, so I need to do that. So what I'm going to do, and again it's not that dissimilar to when we did this object here. In fact, you can see proportionally it's not a million miles off, is it? So what we're going to do is we're going to choose some measurements, and I'm going to estimate them, and I'm going to come in, if you want to measure it, that's 10 mil there. So from that corner it'll be about the same thickness. I'm not mad. If you don't want to measure it, don't worry too much. I think if you want to, it makes it a bit more consistent with mine. So that's 1 centimetre that way, 10 mil. 1 centimetre that way, 10 mil. And back here, I'm going to come, instead of it being 1 centimetre, I'm going to come in at about 7, because it's further away, gets a little bit smaller. All right, now I'm going to then, what else do I need? I'm just thinking I need to come in here from this back corner here. I'm going to come in about 7 as well. Okay. So those are my measurements. I'm doing those big dots. Remember, you need to do those nice and lightly. And then what I'm going to do from these two is go to VP1. And from these two, I'm going to go to VP2. They only need to exist on this shape. So sometimes I've taken you all the way to these vanishing points. I don't want to do that this time. We're going to only take our line. We'll be a little bit more sophisticated with it this time. So although my rule is going all the way to VP1, to that dot, my drawing line is only going until I meet my next line. And the same from this dot to VP1 there. Okay, now it doesn't look hollow or anything at the moment because I'm missing the next two edges, and then we'll start to be able to see inside it a little bit. So we're going there, and I'm only going to plot between those two lines this time. So although I'm making sure I'm lined up and being accurate there, this time I'm only going between those two lines there to there. Right, so this is where if you're drawing with a different angle, you might actually see inside and see as far as the base. I don't think on my drawing I would be able to do that, and I'm going to give it a quick check by looking at the vanishing point. It's only just, if you look, my vanishing point to that corner kind of shows me where my bottom edge would be. But that would result in a line. Let me put my rule on the other side. That would result in a line very close to that line there. Okay, now the other thing that I haven't taken into account with that is the fact that I'm coming from this corner here. I'd actually probably, if you imagine, if I'd drawn a thickness here, I'd actually be coming further over in reality, which would mean that my line would almost run parallel with that. So to avoid confusion with this base, I'm actually going to ignore looking down into the bottom. But you might want to just do a little bit of a check, go from that bottom corner there to there, and it could be that your drawing could take a little bit of a base. And if it does, you might want to draw that in, and you then go from this corner here to that corner there. But it makes it simple for me. My dimensions have worked out for me. So I'm going to do a single line here to indicate the back corner of the box. And again, it's a vertical line. So it's literally going to come down, making sure I'm parallel. I'm not trying to line it up with that. It looks like it's close to it. It should actually be a little bit offset from this line here. And I'm going to just check that I've got it right, and then draw that line in to the next line. It's a funny light on this today. It's struggling a bit. There we go. So as I say, realistically, you might find that that could have a little bit of a base. I'm not going to draw mine in today. I'm going to keep it simple. Right, now I plotted those lines backwards, and what those do is they give me a starting point for my vertical lines here. So all I need to do to start creating a thickness on my top is to actually run my rule up to that corner, and I'm making sure I'm parallel, and I'm going to draw straight up, and I'm going to come down here. I'm looking at that, So it's where this one plots backwards. Now, to me, that looks a little bit wide, but I'm going to follow the rules of perspective and I'm going to draw it in anyway. If you look, that one there and that one there are kind of the same width, and really I would want that one to be a little bit narrower. So I could make adjustments. To me, I would probably be chopping a bit off there, but I'd have to look at whether I've got this bit of perspective right here first of all. So I'm not going to go through that on this video, but if you look, visually to me, that is looking chunkier than that, because I would expect that to be narrower. So something somewhere, my perspective is not perfect there. Anyway, we'll live with that. Now I'm going to estimate this size-wise. I think I'm going to make it about 6. But I do want my top, whatever I decide there, I want to be the same at the top edge, because they're at the same distance. So in theory, that and that are no further away than each other, so they should be the same. Okay. Now I go from each of those to VP2. I only need it to run within this shape. So I'm going from that point until I meet my next line. So check that I'm going to my vanishing point. There's the point. And I go to the next line. Okay, so that now gives me the equivalent of this top opening, but on the box. To me, that makes that even more obviously not quite right. So again, you might want to do some investigation. Now, next bit. We're going to see inside the box, so we need to look at these two corners here and look at projecting back to our VP1. I'm going to do this quite lightly. This is where your eyes have gone a bit probably now. You've got lots of lines. Just try and sort of follow a logical process. I'm drawing that line further than I need to, but I just wanted to make sure it's going back to the vanishing point. And this one, we'll just look at where that goes. It's going to be a very shallow top, but it'll work. So again, I'm going all the way back to the vanishing point from that corner. So if that was an infinite tube, let's like an air conditioning duct or something, that would go on down there. But we're going to chop it off. And again, I could do it off that, but we're going to cheat it a little bit. We're going to come from VP2. We're going to aim for the point on the box here. Again, in reality, it's probably a little bit higher than that, so you can have a little bit of margin of error if you want. I'm going to just come up slightly off that corner, a couple of mil, and then if you look at this line here, running along, so from that line, I'm going to project until I meet the next line. So that's my vertical face. So I'm not going to go beyond that. So that now forms kind of the floor of that lid in its open position. The back edge of it is going to come here, parallel with that. So we'll draw that in. And that starts, I know where that begins because it's where that line finished. Okay, really check my parallels. I know I say that a lot, but when I look at a drawing, if I walk around a classroom and I see students who've not done it parallel, it stands out an absolute mile. So it's worth checking. Now the final line in this is going to be from this corner here. We're looking down on the object and we're looking up on the object at the same time because it's above our eye level line and below our eye level line. So what we've got to do is we've got to plot from VP2 through that point there where it's the top of that edge until we meet this face here. Okay, so I'm on to VP2, wind it up until I meet the top of that line and project through. Okay, so that's now the top, the side, bottom, and this rectangle type shape there is our back panel. Okay, now what I'm going to do, I'm going to just, when you do this bit, be careful which lines you're keeping. I'm going to just make my keeper stand out a little bit more. If you're not sure which line, stop and check. It's very easy to get carried away. Now, I'm not drawing in here wood joints and stuff like that. I've done that with students in the past and it looks really good, but I think for our video we'll just keep it the same sort of procedure. Alright, now, so remember that line, don't make it up, it does go to VP2. What we could do, if you were doing this, using this part of your design project for your GCSE or your BTEC or whatever, you could start thinking about how you maybe draw drawers into there, or different shelving units and different levels and stuff, and you could maybe plot onto these lines and project 3 vanishing points, or you might decide to put a divider in here. Make sure that you're still working back to vanishing points. Don't just kind of add lines in and think that's okay. The other thing with this is, if you actually, once you've got a perspective drawing like that, you can then do what's called an underlay. So you take the object that you just drawn and you actually use it as the starting point. I don't know if you can see through there. You use that as the starting point for other designs where you maybe experiment with different layouts for the interior, but without having to spend ages getting your perspective absolutely right, because you've got your underlay drawing and you can use that as the beginning of as many different versions of that as you want. Okay, now I did that a little bit roughly, but so the final thing for me, I'm going to just add a little bit of colour to this, and I'll do it the same as I've done it before, where I kind of look at three tones generally. I make sure I've got a really nice dark, I make sure I've got a really nice light, which tends to be any upward facing surface, and then I have a mid-tone which is facing whichever face is left, and then when it's falling away, like underneath, I'll try and get that as dark as I can. Don't be tempted to go start adding black pencil or drawing pencil to it, and try and get your tones by using your colouring pencils. Alright, so I'm going to give that a bit of a go to do some colouring in now. I'll probably fast forward that, and good luck with it. I'm going to leave it at that. I've added a little bit of colour to it. Quite difficult to only get 3 tones. What I was conscious of is keeping it reasonably dark in there. I think my back panel is probably a little bit lighter than it should be. I think these 2 surfaces there could probably both be a little bit darker, but what I found when I was shading it in is that I couldn't make my pencil go much darker than that. So I couldn't really get the oomph that I wanted without going to an extra set of pencils, and I didn't want to do that. I'm very conscious that people don't have tons of stuff at home at the moment, so what I've done is I've used literally just the colouring pencil that I had to hand, and rather than doing a drop sort of shadow bit behind it to lift it off the page, what I did is I just taken a little bit of time to do a little rectangle that is not trying to be a background in the real sense. It's just something to help the drawing stand off the page. If I'd ever done that in markers or airbrush or computers before, maybe I'd have done it a little bit bigger. I didn't want to make it massive. And again, because I haven't got loads of colouring pencils here, I'm not going to fuss with this too much. I haven't done any kind of drop shadow to lift that a little bit, which I could do. Again, if I was pushing this drawing a little bit now, I'd probably be starting to look at whether or not I could use a fine liner pen to make my edges really sharp. And I think in our next drawing, possibly what we'll do is we'll look at taking an object that we've already got and then exploding it outwards and looking at how we use our projection lines in perspective to demonstrate some of the construction of a product. And so I think that's what we'll do on our next one. So give that a go. Hopefully that's about 20-30 minutes of reasonable viewing, and I'll see you on the next one. Cheers, good luck.